resolution of the Environmental Planning Commission. Please contact the city clerk at city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of the EPC are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted in the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comment during the public comment periods of an item by joining the Zoom webinar with the webinar ID of 853-0070-5240. Emails and voicemail messages received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the EPC. I'll now ask the EPC clerk to call the roll. Ms. Penela?
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Here.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Here.
Commissioner Nunez?
Here.
Vice Chair Yin?
Here.
And Chair Cranston?
Here.
All right, looks like everyone's present.
Did you get Commissioner Gutierrez?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see on the list. And Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yeah.
Right, so thank you. All present and accounted for. Item number 3 on the agenda is meeting minutes. We'll be reviewing the meeting minutes from the June 1st, 2022 and the July 27th, 2022 meetings. So first, is there any discussion from commissioners on the minutes that were circulated? Being any, we will open it up to public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on the minutes? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer and let you know when your time is up. Ms. Penela, do we have anyone wishing to talk about the minutes?
I don't see any hands raised. No one.
All right, and we'll bring it back to the EPC. So do I have a motion on the minutes? Vice Chair Yin.
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes as was posted.
Second. That's for both meetings?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
That was me.
Was that Mr. Dempster? Okay. Okay. All right. Ms. Penela, can you take the roll?
Yeah. Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Aye.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Nunez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Yin?
Aye.
And Chair Cranston?
Aye.
The motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. All right. Item 4 on the agenda is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on an item that is not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line to provide public comment on a non-agenda item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer and let you know when your time is up. Ms. Penela, do we have anyone wishing to speak in this section?
And I'm seeing no hands raised. No.
All right, then we will close oral communications. Item 5 on the agenda is a study session, a review of the Housing Amendment Update Draft Eir. We will be getting a presentation from Ellen Yao, Project Planner.
Good evening, thank you, Chair Cranston. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And are you able to see it in presentation mode right now? Great, yep. Thank you. So good evening, Chair Cranston, Vice Chair Yin, and commissioners. Tonight, we will be going over the draft environmental impact report. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to receive comments from the EPC and the community on the draft EIR. So the comments collected tonight and other written comments received during the public comment period, they will guide the revisions that will need to be made to this draft report before it is finalized and then used by the community and decision makers. So as you can see on this slide, it shows the EIR schedule. We started this process with the publication of the notice of preparation earlier this year, and we also held a public scoping meeting. And at that scoping meeting, we collected comments that went into the analysis that's included in this draft EIR. So the draft EIR was published a little over a week ago, and any person from the public can submit written comments on the EIR to the city up until September 5th. Tonight's public meeting is just an additional opportunity to collect comments. The project team will prepare responses to all the comments that we receive tonight and written comments and revise the draft EIR as necessary. So the response to comments, this draft EIR that's presented tonight, and the text revisions to the draft EIR taken together will constitute the final EIR for this project. The City Council, following a recommendation from EPC, which is tentatively scheduled for November, they will consider the certification of the final EIR and adoption of the housing element in December. So the purpose of the EIR and the CEQA requirement is highlighted here. I want to go over that in the last cycle for the housing element. An addendum to the 2030 General Plan EIR was prepared, and it was determined that the analysis of the impacts and the mitigation measures that was identified in that the General Plan EIR, it remains substantially unchanged in the fifth cycle. So, but with the significantly higher RHNA numbers that we have in the sixth cycle, many cities, including Mountain View, us, have elected to prepare an EIR to cover that. As a program EIR, the report analyzes potential physical environmental impacts of the proposed 2023-2031, AKA the sixth cycle housing element update. So the housing element update project that we've done multiple study sessions on, I just want to highlight that it plans for a total RHNA of 11,135 units, including a buffer. That totals approximately about 15,000 multifamily housing units and about 96 ADUs. From that, about 1,000 or 1,400 units would result from the proposed rezonings, but the majority of those units, 13,600 of those units, are already permitted under current zoning. So the CEQA approach that we've taken this time around is this new program EIR because of the significant increase in the RHNA numbers, but you do have to note that a lot of the numbers, a lot of the units that are covered in the housing element update is already permitted under current zoning. So as a program EIR, it does not provide detailed analysis that a project level EIR would. Instead, this EIR, you should really look at it as a disclosure. It discloses potential environmental impacts that might be anticipated if the maximum scenario of the housing element update is built out at the broad scale that is proposed. In actuality, when each project comes in for review, they'll still be assessed to determine their consistency with the EIR. They will be subject to the mitigation measures that are identified, but they will be required to conduct project-specific environmental analyses as necessary. So as part of this EIR, there are about 15 topics that analyzed, and they're listed here. The ones that are bolded are the ones I'm going to go over in the following slides. The ones that are unbolded had less than significant impacts. So I'll go over the next, I think 3 or 4 slides will be the ones that are impacts that were mitigated to less than significant, and then also a significant impact. So first we have air quality. I'm going to go over the issue and then the mitigation. All of the specific details are highlighted in the draft the draft environment impact report, and it also is kind of briefly summarized in the staff report, but I'll just briefly go over in the presentation here. For air quality, construction activity could result in exposing sensitive populations to pollutants. So the mitigation is that large projects will be required to prepare a construction health risk assessment, an HRA, which then could require them to do something like special construction equipment to reduce some of the potential pollutants. Under biological resources, removal of trees or structures could result in adverse impacts to special status bat species. So the mitigation is that they would be required to conduct pre-construction surveys to ensure that the bats are protected. This is very similar to an existing city standard condition of project approval for nesting birds. So would be consistent to some of the other surveys that we have required for projects. For cultural resources, projects may demolish or impact historical resources. The mitigation is that for sites that weren't previously evaluated, we'd require them to do a historic resource evaluation. And then based off of that, the project could be redesigned to protect the resource or mitigated with other design strategies. We do want to highlight that as part of picking out sites for the site's inventory, the inventory doesn't include any known or likely historic resources. That was part of the evaluation when we selected sites. So therefore the impact to the cultural resources and the necessity for this mitigation measure, we believe is unlikely to occur, but the mitigation is there in cases for sites that have not been evaluated thoroughly. Then we have cultural resources and tribal cultural resources. Projects may demolish and impact archaeologic resources. So the mitigation is that if any resources are encountered during construction will stop and will require preservation measures. And then any projects that will have ground disturbance will have to conduct site-specific cultural resource study as part of their process. And then for this last bullet point, greenhouse gas, projects would generate greenhouse gas emissions, and their mitigation would be that they would have to provide additional electric vehicle charging infrastructure and then also implement vehicle miles traveled VMT reduction measures. This is the last slide for impacts mitigated to less than significant. This one for HAZ is hazards. Projects could occur on or near hazardous material sites, and they'd be required to complete a phase 1 environmental site assessment and any follow-up work that would need to be done as part of that. Transportation projects could be in areas where it cannot be screened out from VMT impact analysis, and if they don't screen out, then we'd require them to conduct the VMT impact analysis and then also implement VMT reduction measures. And then UTL is the utilities. Projects could result in the need for improvements to the city's water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater drainage systems, and the mitigation would be that they would contribute to a fair share amount to fund those projects for improvements. The only identified impact that is identified as significant and unavoidable is under air quality. I want to highlight that the Housing Element Project is a citywide planning document, so it does anticipate for potential development over quite a long period of time. So there will be a variety of projects that will have different levels of impact based on their size, construction time, and how it overlaps with other construction projects at the same time and their location. So it's very likely that most projects would not exceed any significant thresholds as the one that's identified here. But based on the scale of the housing element, so the number of potential units and the 8-year timeline, it is also likely that there may be some projects that could exceed screening thresholds. So as a disclosure document in this EIR and in anticipation of such projects, this draft EIR identifies impacts to air quality as a significant and unavoidable impact. As listed here, large developments could result in criteria air pollutant emissions above the established thresholds of significance. The mitigation that's identified is listed to reduce potentially the number of cases and the severity of the impact of the criteria air pollutants from such large projects. As part of CEQA, we're also required to identify alternatives to the project. So when considering alternatives, the evaluation is really to compare project alternatives that would reduce the proposed project's significant impact, which is the one that was on the previous slide, while reasonably achieving the objectives of the project. So in this case, the project is the housing element update, which is required by the state. And so the goals are to protect existing housing, encourage new housing, remove undue constraints to new housing development, affirmatively further fair housing, and to identify specific sites to meet the RHNA allocation. So based off of the analysis that we have, it shows that neither alternatives, we have two listed, the no project alternative and the reduced sites alternative, neither of these would eliminate the air quality significant impact, but they could reduce the severity of it. So for the no project alternative would introduce a new significant impact that's identified in the land use and planning topic, And it would also not meet the objective of adopting a compliant housing element if we don't go through with the project. Based on this analysis, you can see that the reduced sites alternative is the environmentally superior alternative because it could reduce air quality impacts and it would meet all of the basic project objectives of the proposed housing element update, though not as well as the proposed housing element. So you can see that. So the goal tonight is pretty narrow. We are here to gather comments on a very technical document that will contribute to the final development of the EIR. As part of the CEQA process, responses to the comments and the draft EIR, again, together will reflect in the final EIR. And the final EIR can then be used to to go over and discuss policy recommendation and solutions. So staff poses this question to the EPC. Do you have any comments on the draft EIR? Comments should focus on the environmental issues and impacts that's disclosed in the EIR. Any discussion about the mitigation measures and whether more data and analysis is desired to be included in the draft EIR. Any questions that come up should focus on the content and scope of the EIR or the EIR process. And then briefly, just to wrap up, this is a CEQA process and project timeline. The draft EIR, again, is circulated for public review about a week and a half ago and will be open until September 5th. So it's open for the public to review. You can go to www.mvhousingelement.org, our project website, and it has the draft EIR and appendices located there. So any person can submit written comments on the EIR to the city during the circulation period. This EPC hearing is just one of the opportunities where the public can provide comments. And that's the end of my presentation. I have with me Eric, Advanced Planning Manager, and Jill from ESA, our consultants. Thank you.
So as a study session, the next step is public comment. So would any member of the public on the line like to comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer and let you know when your time is up. Laura, do we have anyone wishing to speak on the EIR study session?
I'm not seeing any hands raised currently. No, still not seeing any hands raised.
Going once, going twice. Okay, then we will bring it back to the commission. So we do both questions and discussion. One of the things that when I talked yesterday with Ellen and Eric, is since this is really commenting on the EIR, in other study sessions, sometimes we'll take a straw poll at the end to kind of see if people agree with it. What staff is really looking for is any comment. So we won't be taking straw polls after we collect the feedback. Staff will simply note those and fold those in as they review the EIR going forward. So let's open up for questions. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, sir. So I've got two quick questions. One deals with the mitigation under utilities. So on page 5, the third bullet point, mitigation projects will contribute a fair share amount to fund capital utility improvements. So my question is, how do you define fair share? And is this like a standard practice that other cities have also gone through? And if so, which cities have you noticed, have you used this type of approach? That's the first one.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just promoted Senior Civil Engineer Renee Gunn, and she should be able to answer that question.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, commissioners. So I am, as Eric said, Senior Civil Engineer and Land Development. I help support planning on these redevelopment projects. This one happens to be exactly up my alley. Some of the other questions tonight, I will have to say, I'm speaking for Public Works and a lot of different divisions. But the utilities is right up my alley. So when a project comes in, and we think that they're going to have an impact on our utility system because they're asking for something above and beyond our zoning, or if our guys know that there are impacts downstream and there are issues downstream, we ask for a utility impact study that's done by a third party that models our whole system. And they provide us with some very specific information that ends up with something that looks like this project is contributing X% to this sewer lateral. And we take that X% times a standard rate per linear foot, and we come up with a fee that they're required to pay.
Gotcha. Okay. And then in terms of specifics for how this would work in general, since I don't think this would be part of that, of the update now, would this be taken care under a separate document for processes to be understood by all, or how is that going to work out?
So those utility impact studies are done as part of the planning entitlement process. So what happens, that is the planning, the utility study becomes part of what is taken to EPC or council, and it becomes a condition of approval of the project with the amount that they're required to pay.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your help on that. And then my second question and my final question, and it's a basic one, so bear with me here. But page 215 of the PDF, there's also a reference of the big picture of a water usage on page 309. But my main question is, can any project be stopped or not approved because of a water shortage? I noticed that we have all these other different types of elements regarding water usage, but I didn't see anything under water shortage, quote unquote. So I figured to ask just for clarification's sake, because I'm sure there's other folks thinking about the worst case scenario. Thanks for your patience there.
So the water supply assessment that's included in this EIR, it looks at both what happens in a normal year, a single dry year, and multiple dry years. And what the EIR is saying and the water supply assessment is saying is we have sufficient supply in those years to provide water for these housing units. Now, it's important to note, because we're all familiar with the drought that we're in right now, that in most drought scenarios, including the one we're in, the demand reductions that are being put in place right now are required for all agencies, irrespective of whether or not the individual agency has sufficient supply.
Okay, great. Thank you, Renee. Thanks for your clarification on that. Thanks for your help and welcome to the team.
Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have 3 questions, and actually 2 of them are going to sound very familiar because I want to follow up on the questions that Commissioner Gutierrez raised, because I think they're excellent questions. So first, I want to ask sort of a broad table setting question. So if we're talking about in the CIR upwards of what could be 15,000 new units over the course of cycle 6, how many roughly units do we have in the city right now? Anybody who feels like answering it?
We have about 38,000 units in the city right now.
38,000 units. So this environmental impact, the program EIR is talking about the environmental impact for us to increase our total number of units. I don't know what that percentage is, but it's like, what is it, like 30, 40%? I don't know. I was a political science guy, not a math guy. But like, that's huge. That is absolutely huge of an impact. You know, this is 4 times what it was in cycle 5. So I think that's important to reinforce, because we're talking about a level of growth and trying to guess at the impacts of a level of growth that I don't know that Mountain View's ever seen. And I think that that's just important to start right there. So that I wanted to ask about utilities, and I want to ask about water. So for utilities, I understand, and Renee, that was really helpful what you were saying about how we go about paying for it. The 2 questions I have are, 1, when was the last time the fair share rate was updated? And do we feel confident that fair share now is truly fair share and it's not some rate that was, you know, designated and 1984 and has never been changed.
So first, to clarify, that fair share rate is not by far the only way that we're using to build the utility systems. So as Ellen mentioned, the vast majority of these units are already underneath the North Bayshore Precise Plan or the East Westman Precise Plan. So when we do a general plan, a precise plan, any of those planning documents, there's utility studies that are done with those. And those show the city what major infrastructure we need to build to support this growth. So for those sites that are already zoned, we know what those pipes are, and we're already incorporating those into the CIP to do those improvements. And some of those improvements that came out of North Bayshore are under construction right now. Now, for North Bayshore and for East Westman, we also have precise plan fees that pay for those. And I also have a sewer and water capacity fee that goes onto every new unit, square footage, well, not every new unit, not below market rate units, every unit square footage that gets built out there. And so we as a city are planning, as you know, community development is doing these large planning documents, Public Works is doing utility studies behind the scenes and making sure that the city's infrastructure is there to support this growth. So as we go along, we're looking at that bigger picture. On top of that, every 5 to 10 years, we're doing new master plans that's remodeling the whole city and making sure that our assumptions are right.
It sounds like you're pretty confident that with all of these units, to the extent that there may be additional infrastructure required, the fair share process and other processes that we have in place are sufficient or more than sufficient to ensure that the city doesn't get left holding the bag for a bunch of infrastructure improvements as a result. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That is part of my job, yes.
Awesome. That's why I'm glad we have you.
To answer the simple question though, that fair share dollar amount that we use, we actually look at it every year based off of the CIPs that were done the previous year to make sure that we have a reasonable amount, because as you may be aware, the cost of construction has gone up significantly in the last couple of years. So we have increased that dollar amount as we go.
That's fantastic. I feel better already. More questions about, or another question about water. And I guess I want to understand just a little bit more about how do we plan for drought. So it's absolutely, it's fantastic that the normal process plans for both a regular year, a one-year drought, and it sounds like a multi-year drought. My understanding is that we're in a drought that historically had only occurred on the order of hundreds of years. I don't want to quote it. I thought it was 500, but I could be totally wrong. But it is an ahistoric drought, is my understanding. And I think I'm a little concerned about whether the process is taking into account something that's that unusual. And I guess I would be curious to know, like, is it true if we actually increased our number of units by, again, my math is probably wrong, but 30-40%, we'll say. Like if we called up, and I don't even know who produces our water or provides our water. Is it Hetch Hetchy? I'm not sure. But if we called up the provider of our water and said, hey, we've got 15,000 units coming online in the next 8 years. You promise you're going to have the water, right? And they would say yes. Is that true or not? I'm seeing the chair shaking his head, and I really would like to because Commissioner Gutierrez's question was totally on point, and I think it really does deserve a solid answer.
So it's a political answer more than a technical answer. So I'm going to talk off of some of what our public services division provided me with information on. I think there's a lot of questions, yes, of course, about drought. We use a standard practice for looking at water supply assessments because, of course, we have to look at them equally across all projects. We do look at you know, multiple single years, we do have supply based off of what we have been told right now from SFPUC, which is the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who runs Hetch Hetchy, what they're providing for us right now. There are a lot of things going on right now. We know that they're working with state regulators to increase the supply in dry years as part of the Bay Delta plan. We are looking at that and looking at alternative sources that we may have for water if we really do get to that point that what we're getting from SFPUC is not enough. But I want to emphasize the drought restrictions that are in place right now are not because we don't have the supply. They're because we have been told there is a statewide supply issue and everybody needs to conserve. And to answer your question, we do get water from SFPUC, a little bit from Valley Water, and we do have our own groundwater wells if we need to use those also.
Before I give you my last comment, I will say I'm empathetic how hard of a job it is that you have in trying to guess, you know, whether it's going to rain or not, and will other political organizations give us water or not. That it's tough to forecast that. I guess what I would say is I'm curious to know. Well, first of all, I just wish there was some discussion of the mitigation that we would use if SFPUC came back 4 years from now and said, you're not getting everything that you think you are. Like, what would we do? I'm curious to know what it is. That seems like a perfect place for a potential mitigation. And maybe more importantly, if we leave it as is right now, and that occurs, like 4 years from now, SFPUC says, sorry, you're getting 30% cuts for the rest of the foreseeable future. How would that impact this? Like, if they just said the water's not coming, what would that mean, practically speaking, for the EIR, for this process, and for the sort of the rights that people have been given to build, not knowing that the water wasn't going to be there? So either can we, to try to make this clear, would it be possible to have potential mitigations raised in the EIR in case that happens? And can you tell me what would happen if we didn't, and that water shortage showed up?
I think that's some very good questions that I'm going to need to get back to you on. I would point you towards the citywide urban water management plan that looks at some of those issues for the whole city. And then we'll get you some more details on what we can and cannot include in the EIR, and then some more information on how the city is planning for this.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Ms. Gunn said, which is that, you know, the purpose of this meeting is to get your comments. If that's a comment that you want to provide or whatever, we can respond through the FEIR and get you more thorough information that way. I'll just add one more thing. The water supply assessment we did was a very, very conservative analysis. And just to give you an idea of how conservative it is, we actually didn't subtract the existing water use from sites that are redeveloped. We just took the existing site and plopped, you know, whatever, 100 units of water use on top of it. We're effectively double counting landscaping that way. We're double counting all kinds of things. And in fact, what we're seeing in a lot of redevelopment is that even if it is a very intensive redevelopment, water use can go down because we're losing so much landscaping, right? And that's where a lot of water goes. And so as the city becomes more efficiently built, there are a lot of opportunities for increased water efficiency that way. It's not a quantitative answer. I don't know if it will get through the scenario that you're talking about, like SFPUC shutting off the pipes, but it is something that I think it's good to remember as you're reading the WSA.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Ms. Gunn. Thank you. That was very helpful to me. And please repurpose my questions as a comment. And Eric, same to you, however you see fit.
That's all your questions, Commissioner Jensen? Yeah, okay. Commissioner Haymeyer.
Thank you, and thanks for the great conversation about water and utilities. I want to be mindful, Ellen, that you frame this in a certain way, and I hope I don't take us off track, but I come at things from a policy perspective, and I just want to make sure that I tried to do my homework. I will admit I didn't get through every detail of the draft Eir, so bear with me if this was buried somewhere and I didn't get it. But taking a step back and thinking about this draft Eir, I know that we have our 11,000 units and a buffer, but let's say HCD comes back to the city and says our draft site inventory for whatever reason is inadequate and we have to add new housing sites, new residential sites. I know there's capacity, we've talked about it, there's capacity in the general plan, but would that require an addendum to this Eir? What is that process? If for whatever reason HCD says, we don't think these are actually going to get built in the next 8 years?
So there are a bunch of different potential scenarios for inadequacy that we're planning for.
Okay.
You know, I mean, that we don't think it'll happen, but we've got a bunch of things in our back pocket, as it were, to just in case there are comments. For example, we could make more sites that already allow housing, allow it by right with 20% affordable, right? So that would allow HCD to let us count more sites, right, to the site's inventory. And so that wouldn't change the overall capacity of the city or the plan or anything like that, right? We could just proceed.
And that doesn't require additional environmental analysis, right? Because it's already zoned. Okay.
Yeah, you're not changing the actual build out, the physical build out of the city. Another potential scenario is we need to identify more sites to rezone. Well, council said, you know, here's a bunch of areas that we could have in our quote unquote back pocket that we have in our no net loss program. And we actually analyzed those in this EIR. So we can just move forward with those as sites to rezone as part of the housing element and do them within 3 years. And that would be, we've already done the environmental analysis on those. So that's just two potential scenarios for how we could move forward without having to do a whole bunch more analysis. If both of those fall apart and we need to identify, 5,000 new sites and, they don't accept the, rezoning by right or whatever, then we may have to go back and do another public circulation of the EIR. I don't know, Ms. Figmini, if you can think of any other kind of potential scenarios through the sequel process.
Yeah, basically in the final EIR, there could be changes, and there likely will be some changes to the program of the housing element that we would describe. And the job in the final EIR is to make sure the EIR still covers it, and that there are no additional significant impacts or additional mitigation measures that we didn't already anticipate.
That's an excellent point. And just to bring it full circle, there are a lot of potential additional housing sites that we could zone for that wouldn't have any more mitigation measures or impacts.
And I guess maybe this brings me to a question about timeliness. So the letter we received from YIMBY, Mountain View YIMBY, suggested that their analysis from the past cycle maybe thinks that the city is being too optimistic in terms of the number of units that would actually be built in the next 8 years. Can staff comment a little bit about that 66%? I mean, is that consistent with what you all see? I know we have some pretty significant pipeline in North Bay Shore and East Wisman that we're banking on, but does that number give you pause? It's a different way of looking at your work, right?
Yeah. So we're doing a comparable analysis of that, just in case HCD comes back and has the same requirement. Our comparable analysis, looking at approved projects I think that's the comment you're talking about, where they said, only the 60-some% of approved projects actually got built, or approved units actually got built. That is not what our analysis finds. It's certainly the case that some projects go through multiple iterations of developers. And it's certainly the case that sometimes projects do get hung up for a while. One project that was inactive back in 2014 was 870 El Camino, and that's a project that you're going to be seeing in a couple of weeks here. And so, yeah, that's 7 years of inactivity, right? We probably wouldn't have included it in our EIR back in 2014 because it was inactive. It wasn't moving forward. They only submitted one application and then they went away. They just weren't moving forward on the application. That being said, looking at all of these other sites where we've had a developer moving forward, they withdraw, another developer comes in almost immediately. And in almost all of those cases, the developer that comes in almost immediately after withdrawal of an application comes in at more units. So 400 San Antonio, which was a project that had one developer for a while, and then another developer came in at 20 or 30% higher. The California Street project, which is under construction right now on the corner of California and San Antonio, had one developer for a while, came back much larger. The one that people have been talking about a lot now, the Summerhill project on East Middlefield, they withdrew their approved project, but we're looking at a project now that's 10 or 15% larger. And so in an environment like Mountain View, where land values are so high and there's so much development interest, a site that is a viable development site does not stay, it's going to move forward. So we're working on the kind of comparable numbers of, kind of pessimistically approved projects that might not proceed, but it's nowhere near 66%.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I'm not trying to be negative. I just really want to be realistic. And I think, every analysis I have seen is that it's the housing growth is tied to employment. And if assuming employment, but there are huge upheavals with employment. And so I think I just want to be really cautious as we're going into this cycle to say, yes, we have major employers, but the future of work is so uncertain that, we have a very long time horizon with Google and some of these other projects that I want to be as confident as possible that the next 8 years, we're going to see some of these things come to fruition. I agree with all of what you said, Eric. So thank you for helping. And then I will ask one final question before letting others chime in. So one of the housing element programs that we talked about is the idea of allowing residential on sites that currently haven't had residential uses in the past, right? So I'm thinking primarily about religious sites. If I miss this in the draft Eir, please let me know. But how do we think about studying that additional capacity and calling out those specific programs in the draft Eir? And if I miss that, I would just be glad to figure out where that analysis is and understand when we're adding housing or residential to a site that currently doesn't have it, how we're studying that capacity.
So we're studying residential capacity at a very high level, right? We're studying it in terms of thousands of units being added to the city, thousands of, hundreds of units being added to different neighborhoods as specified in the sites inventory. There's also some assumptions for, in the cumulative scenario, a significant number of units coming from, single family lots under SB 9. So we're really looking at, very general, broad citywide growth. This is not a site-specific analysis by any means.
Can you tell I'm really struggling with that? It's a different EIR to read.
Yeah, exactly. But certainly in, if a project were to come through, we would do any kind of necessary site-specific analysis. If it's creek adjacent or something like that, we might have to do something. If it's, if there are potential, as we said, construction impacts or something like that, we might have to do some initial analysis on those specific sites. Ms. Fakemani, did you have something else to add?
No, I mean, I think you did a good job explaining the programmatic nature of the EIR, that, there is the aspect of looking citywide and trying to predict potential physical impacts that could occur. And that was what the draft EIR is intended to cover.
So conceptually, that makes sense. I think as we work toward the final EIR, I think in the areas where there has not historically been zoning for residential, that piece makes me uncomfortable. I understand it's programmatic, but I think if there's some level of analysis that would be possible, or to call it out, the programs that we're talking about in the housing element update should be reflected in the EIR analysis in some way. And again, it's a big document, so if I missed it, or if it's framed in a different way, but I would like to see that kind of direct tie to say, here's some of the programs and then what those impacts are, even if it's at a very general level. To me, that piece, at least with the religious organizations, didn't come through. And I don't know if that's a useful comment, but I want to be explicit. This is our intention, that we're trying to say, here's where we think we could anticipate some impacts. And with that, I'll defer to others. Thank you for indulging me.
I did read the whole thing. I didn't memorize everything. But my recollection was the religious sites was in the section saying, these are things that we did not add. It wasn't part of what we did add.
Okay.
The areas around El Camino Hospital were included in that. There were like 4 or 5 different things that we had kind of talked about and were brought in front of council that I thought were in the section that said, if we need more, we could go back and look at it, but we didn't include those. But Ellen or Eric would probably have to come verify that. But I thought that was in the we didn't include it section.
So we didn't include it in the sites inventory because we didn't have any confidence that we could make the argument to HCD that these are viable sites for housing, even though we intend to move forward on a rezoning action to allow affordable housing on these sites. Now, it's kind of one of our backup upon backup strategies to HCD to kind of show them, hey, we're over preparing for this housing element. And so those units were actually planned for in the EIR because they are part of a program for in the housing element. We do have to include them in our analysis. They're just not part of the sites inventory. And so it's not quite the same category as the El Camino Hospital sites, which I believe council said to not include in either the sites inventory or the backup. So those aren't studied at all. Those units aren't studied at all.
I just want to repeat back what I think I heard you say. The religious sites were part of the analysis, but not explicitly counted as part of the environmental analysis, but not explicitly called out as part of the site inventory. So, that's okay. Because I guess, really where this concern comes from, and I promise this is the last thing I'll say, but I don't believe, I think there's been a lot of publicity to cities that are grossly behind their targets. And I know that Mountain View is aggressive and we're doing a lot, but I think HCD is going to have clear scrutiny. And so I want to make sure that our backups upon backups are really well rooted in something that could materialize in the next 8 years. And it makes me nervous because I think the people who get a lot of attention are the cities that just haven't built. And Mountain View's been building a lot, but they're huge economic forces and other things that we can't predict that could change all the good intentions that we have to get this developed. So, okay, thank you.
Questions from other commissioners? I have a few. In looking at the, so one of the things that I found very oh, sorry, I didn't see Commissioner Nunes and Vice Chair again. I will defer my questions.
Okay, cool. You go last, right? Yep, cool. I'll lower my hand. So I guess quick question about like the process on this. So in terms of commentary on this, like if all 7 of us just give comments and such, like on our thoughts on this, what happens to those comments? Do they just go into like a suggestion box, or like what happens?
I'll defer to Ms. Fake-Miney on that.
Yeah, sure. So all of your comments tonight are part of the record. And when we prepare the final EIR, we're going to formally respond to the comments that we've heard here. So there will be probably a specific chapter in the EIR for public hearing comments, and then we'll go through each issue that you've brought up and respond to those comments and provide more information.
Okay, so if 7 of us give like the same either comment or question, versus like if only one person gave it, then you guys would like all you would be doing in that case is just responding to the question, and it would just go into the like final like draft, and then like that would go to HCD, or what would, sorry if I missed it the first time.
Oh yeah, so these are comments on the EIR. So these are just for the city to consider. So I believe Ellen described earlier how your comments will be folded in, responded to formally, and then presented to the city council, along with recommendation, I assume later, from EPC to adopt or not the housing element and certify the EIR.
All right, cool. Then oh, sorry, did you raise your hand?
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of just add on to that so as the public can submit comments in writing, or they could have presented verbal comments at this hearing, the individual comments of commissioners is treated like all of those other comments. And so environmental issues identified in comments are responded to in written responses to comments, and those become part of the final EIR. That is all released to the public. I believe it's 10 days before the city council would consider. I think that's the minimum that they would consider the final EIR, but the EPC will be reviewing the final EIR as part of the review of the final housing element, and provide a recommendation to council on both the EIR and the housing element.
All right, cool. So it sounds like just a public comment then. I'll give a public comment. I am tripping out about the drought and water too. And so, I would really like the EIR to think about like, instead of looking at like, oh, we don't have enough water to like build, what are the things that we can do to save water to build our, allocation, or even more than that. So like legitly, like, why do we need pools? Like, let's cut that out. We can have a public pool, people can go to it. That'll be fantastic. And non-functional landscaping, like grass, so unnecessary. Don't need to have like this vast amount of landscaping, row home developments, like all this kind of stuff. I know they want to look pretty. I know they want to evoke the kind of single family aesthetic, just too much. I would really like to make a strong comment around just get rid of, if like we could find a way to move towards a like no more grass type of scenario, or just very, very, very consciously eliminating non-functional landscaping. Las Vegas is doing it. That would be really fantastic. In addition to giving some sort of incentive for people and or developers to do it. that would be fantastic. In addition to that, some sort of on-site water capture, storage, recycling type of requirement when appropriate. That would really help us capture a lot more of the water that just falls naturally out of the sky. I think that would be one way to ensure we are, doing our localized part to increase water supply. And also density, right? So like in terms of, thinking about our long-term water situation, unless we just try to prevent people from being born or like wanting people to, have some sort of, like agency or choice around where they're living, then we do need to densify. And dense urban infill development is far less water intensive than, nice plots of, single family homes in which I grew up with a big tree in the front and nice, beautiful grass. It's just what it is. So I think in terms of water, that would be a fantastic comment I would like to log. In terms of the electric vehicle stuff, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the governor said that we're gonna no longer sell gas cars like by the middle of next decade or something like that. There was a requirement in there that said about 10% was the requirement for new EV. I'm not going to do the math around, if that's really sufficient or not. But it just seems like, if we are, I hear the term like end of a building's useful life or what have you. If we're thinking about that and thinking about, in 30, 40 years, theoretically, we're not going to have gas powered cars out there anymore. Then 10%, accessibility for like EV charging and such, that's not really seeming pretty doable from my perspective. And then also just in general around this whole like CEQA
process. Do you have questions or we're trying to get through questions and then we'll get comments in different sections. I just want to...
Okay, so this is just questions, or I thought it was.
Yeah, I was trying to make sure.
Okay. So all my questions were around like, what is the nature of this, so that like I could understand. If this is a comment, then I would give a comment. So I could hold off my comments. I'm sure like what I've already said is being logged since it's a public comment.
Yeah.
But like up to you, Chair, if you want me to like reserve the rest of what I'm going to say, or if you want me to like.
Yeah, what I was going to do once we had all the questions in, and then is kind of go through it, make sure we touch on which sections people had comments on, and then so that we were, because there's 15 different sections, make sure we capture everybody. If there's comments on a particular section, we capture those. So.
Well, I would have one more thing to say regardless, so I'll let you call me when ready.
Vice Chair Yoon, do you have other questions?
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say this is a very comprehensive document, and I was quite impressed with the heft of it. Thank you, ESA, for all the work. This has been sort of an ongoing struggle for me when EIRs come out, because it's so technical, and I don't need to get into the technical aspects necessarily or understand every facet, but I have a hard time understanding how adding, and I'm not against it, this is not a judgment, it's just a clarification question, how adding almost like 30% of the population can pose no significant, it doesn't cross the threshold for posing no significant, what I'm talking about, impact. For example, let's say on transportation. Everyone knows in real life, all you have to do is add one big apartment building and it changes things. That's not to say it's not worth it or that there aren't positives to having some added density. I'm just curious how we come up with that. And I don't even have enough of the technical information to even pose the question properly. So I'm not sure how that's going to get answered. So just bear with that, however you guys want to log that one. The second is in terms of figuring out if something is significant or not. For example, transportation, again, I'll just keep on that one since it's on my mind. Like doing TDMs and calculating VMT, that is one of the mitigations. Do you guys have records of what the TDM programs have been doing? And does that circle back into a new EIR? Or do EIRs sort of use the same threshold and only get updated every 5 to 10 years? And it's not, it doesn't happen like every quarter or something. And then it's a new way of looking at the EIR thresholds. So that was another question that might be too technical to answer as well. But I was just curious if things just circulated back in. Information that you gather goes back into determining these thresholds. And then one last question was completely different here. The two back of the pocket sites, one is in the CN neighborhood and the other is in the Grant Phyllis precise plan. And of those two, I know there are some groups that are particularly interested in those. My question is, why the difference in how retail would be calculated if a property owner were to do some redevelopment in those areas? That might be more of a planning question, less of an EIR, sorry. But it kind of...
No, that's fine. I'll cover either one. I'll cover all of the above. On the transportation question, this is it's a great question. The state passed the law, SB 743 or whatever it was a few years ago, that said that vehicle congestion can no longer be a CEQA impact. So when you build an apartment building and it causes more traffic, we are not allowed under CEQA to say that that apartment building is responsible for that traffic from a CEQA perspective. We have other avenues to study and regulate how traffic is affected on our local roadways, but it doesn't happen through an EIR. And the state said that as opposed to studying traffic, what CEQA should be studying is VMT. And really VMT gets down to, it's fundamentally about how efficient are our roadways being used, right? So are we putting buildings closer together, uses closer together so that you don't have to drive very far, even if there is a little bit more congestion? Are we doing a mix of modes so that roads can be used more densely and efficiently through transit or pedestrian and biking? So that was direction from the state, and it's filtered down to everything we do in CEQA. Now, because Mountain View has such a large jobs housing imbalance, it turns out that practically any housing unit you build in Mountain View has a significantly lower than regional average VMT. So that means that pretty much any housing unit that we study in this housing element is probably not going to have a transportation impact because of the structure of that state law, as well as the nature of Mountain View's jobs housing imbalance. Now, we do have our kind of catch-all just in case mitigation measure, because this is a long-term document and because we don't know how these VMT kind of rates could change in the near term. But we do expect that Mountain View will continue to have a relatively low VMT, and that even if it's not below the threshold, we will be able to use TDM measures to get these projects below the VMT threshold. Now, I'm not going to say it's an unlikely scenario, but it would be a fairly uncommon scenario for us to even have to resort to that in this housing element. Now, you also asked the question about whether these things get reanalyzed.
Yeah, like the TDMs.
Yeah, so an EIR is really just an informational document for one action. And in this one action, it's the housing element. We don't bring up the EIR again or reevaluate this action again. We're going to have to do a new housing element in 8 years. So we might have to do a new EIR at that time, and we'll use the latest, greatest information that we have at that time. But we don't retroactively update especially when a decision has already been made. So from a TDM perspective on housing, we don't need very much data to justify it, just because Mountain View's jobs are so high that we expect VMT to be relatively low here. So that was one question. The other question was about the sites that are planned for rezoning for mixed use.
Yeah, back of the pocket. So it's, may or may not be likely that they're included at the very end, but I was just curious, given that from public comment, they had mentioned the wording of the retail, and I was curious why the two are worded differently between Blossom Valley and the Grant Park shopping area. One is in the CN zoning and one is in the precise plan.
Okay, so those are actually not back pocket sites. Those are sites that we're actually going to be bringing forward new zoning language, new precise plan and zoning ordinance language to the EPC to allow housing on those sites in November. And we'll be bringing that forward to the EPC and council as directed by council just a few weeks ago. And so we're doing that to bring the zoning into consistency with the general plan, which already says that housing is allowed on those sites. They were identified as village centers in the 2030 general plan, which was adopted back in 2012. And the only reason that we're doing different actions for the two is because the existing zoning is different for the two. So one of them is within the CN zone today, and so we're going to be applying those residential standards in the CN zone as it would apply to the Blossom Valley site. And then the other one is in the Grant Phyllis precise plan. And rather than, changing the zoning of the site to CN, for example, we'll just add that language to the Grant Phyllis precise plan.
Well, I guess I meant specific to the retail portion in describing what retail would be attributed or required given a potential redevelopment within either of those areas. It seems much more vague within the CN than it is in the precise plan. I just was curious why there was a difference.
Are you referring to a specific comment from a specific email or letter?
Not for this round, but in the last round when we did the housing element draft, I believe Livable Mountain View had said that they thought that those two sites were very possible good uses and to redevelop and to add residential, sorry. But they requested a minimum
EIR question. I'm just, does this tie into the, I'm not clear on how this ties into the EIR.
It's in the EIR document, so it's figured I just asked since it's questions about the document.
Okay, is it in, can you give me a page number and maybe I can look at?
I believe it was chapter 3, I'm gonna say 3, page number. I probably should have written that down. It was just something I passed through. Okay. Let me see if I can find it.
Is it possibly page 54 of the PDF, 314?
314.
Just the way it's written,
yes.
In terms of one saying the minimum retail based on an analysis and the other saying minimum retail on the existing. Is that the difference?
Yes, thank you, Ellen. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ellen. Good eye. Appreciate that. Yeah, so the difference there is really just because the precise plan itself is, I mean, we haven't actually drafted the language yet, so I don't know if I'm actually able to respond to that question. I think the reason behind the different language is just because one is a zoning ordinance amendment and the language has to apply broadly to many different CN sites, while the other one is a precise plan amendment and only has to apply narrowly to the precise plan. It's just that shouldn't be considered a policy decision to have them necessarily be different. And we'll have more specifics for you in the when we present them in November.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. I did have another question about the water as well, but I believe someone had answered that earlier on. There's a sub question there. I hope, if you guys don't mind, I'll just ask it. The city's water master plan update ends this, it comes out at the end of this year. And I'm just going to assume that was also taken into account in doing the EIR. And of course, back to what several of the other EPC members had mentioned with the utilities and how the cost gets divvied.
Correct. So more important, I think the information there is that the growth that we're planning for as part of this housing element was incorporated into the water and sewer master plan updates. So we update those documents about every 10 years, looking at what we're going to need for the next 10 years. And we incorporated the growth that we're expecting as part of all of these projects.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, one more, if you guys are patient, have the patience with me. Okay, last one. I know a lot of us, we're counting on a big chunk of the development to occur at North Bayshore, and I didn't know if it's usually the property owner who does the research on flooding and bay level sea rise and how that will impact their development, or does the city do any of that as well? Just because it is such a big project. You know, there are varying statistics out there about how much will rise and how fast. I think everyone generally concedes that it will happen. And I didn't know, given, you know, the location, how close and how low a lot of that area is, if that will impact what gets built, when it gets built, how it gets built. And if the city looks at that as well as property owner themselves.
Absolutely. So Public Works, as part of the review when projects come through, we are required by FEMA to enforce the Federal Insurance Rate Act, which says you have to build up to a certain elevation. So based off of what FEMA is saying as the flooding in North Bayshore in particular there, we have a minimum elevation that buildings have to build to. For residential buildings, for commercial buildings, they can go below grade if they waterproof. On top of that, the city has adopted a sea level rise study, and we've updated that sea level rise study in the last couple of years. And that sets a minimum elevation that buildings can build to also. Right now, the sea level rise elevation is higher than the federal government's requirements. So of course we build to the sea level rise requirements.
Okay, which is more stringent.
Yes.
Okay, do you happen to know what that is?
Off the top of my head, I think it is 13 at this point in time, 13 feet above sea level. Okay. Most of North Bayshore sits somewhere between 10 and 18 feet above sea level. Mm-hmm. FEMA says we have to build to 11. We're telling you have to build another 2 feet above that. Okay. And I will have to get the newest sea level rise. I've been out of North Bayshore for a while to know exactly what that number is. Last time I looked, it was 13.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gunn. I'm done, I promise. Questions?
Okay. I have several questions. And I realize, Renee, these are probably maybe out of your scope. Do you have any understanding of whether there's any additional capacity for fire engines or trucks at the Rengsdorf Shoreline and Cuesta fire stations?
So I did talk to Brian Jones in the fire department about their long-term kind of capacity needs. And they said that, yes, the growth that we're envisioning could require capacity for more dorms and more truck space in one or two of those fire stations, but we wouldn't need more land to accommodate that. And we certainly wouldn't need to put a new fire station in anywhere because our response times are, within the city standards.
Okay. It sounds like there's no CIP at this point to do any of that kind of expansion.
No, there isn't at this point, but again, as we would have plenty of heads up because this would happen kind of incrementally over time. And they are studying, long-term facilities needs. The city is studying doing a new police fire headquarters right now. And so as part of that, we are looking at long-term facilities needs.
Is the replacement of the police headquarters a formal CIP at this point?
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The study or the actual replacement?
Well, I don't think the building's been designed yet. So right now we're just studying the, what it could look like, how it could be configured on the lot, what are the space needs, things like that.
It is my understanding that the city was reaching out to the school districts to make sure that formal agreements were in place regarding the use of the school recreational areas as public parks. Has that been completed, and do we have agreements in place for all of the parks that are listed in the EIR as part of the public space and park space for the city?
So I don't know the status of those agreements. And frankly, I think that work was going to be done as part of the Parks and Recreation strategic plan. So I'm not sure how far along it is. But that is certainly something that we're planning on doing as part of the Parks and Recreation strategic plan.
Did you use certain assumptions on, I'm sorry? Okay. Did you use certain assumptions on the amount of additional park space that we would be getting through this EIR? Because it says we need a certain amount of space, but I didn't see anything that said that we could actually realize that. Was that analyzed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. First off, I want to try to throw it to Ms. Fakmani for kind of just a high-level overview of what the threshold is for parks and recreation space.
Yeah, sure. So for parks in CEQA, we're looking at two different things. One is, will parks be required to be constructed, and will those parks themselves have significant physical environmental impacts? The second threshold is about existing park facilities and whether there will be substantial physical deterioration of those facilities because of, a volume of new users. So we looked at both of those issues and specifically through the CEQA lens in the Draft Eir, and we described the expected impacts of each of those. From a high level, we did find those as less than significant, as construction of a new park project could occur. We don't know exactly where or when, because this is a planning level document, when those would be needed or where it would occur. But the anticipated impacts would be less than significant. Additionally, I think we relied for the second threshold I mentioned about existing facilities. Mountain View is fortunate to have large regional facilities that can absorb some of the demand for parks and recreational facilities, as well as requirements for new developments for their own private open spaces. So yeah, I think that's what you're thinking of, Eric, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's not that there is a specific acreage per person threshold, the way that we have a goal of 3 acres per thousand in our park planning documents. That doesn't exactly exist in CEQA. We do use, we have funding sources to be able to upgrade and our existing parks, to add additional parkland as necessary. And those resources would generally point to not degrading our existing park facilities and infrastructure as more population is added. So the conclusion, in our analysis still holds that it's a less than significant impact. I will add from a policy perspective that our Parks and Recreation strategic plan is going to evaluate recommendations regarding how we can optimize our additional parkland, how we can work with the schools as well. It covers a broad range of potential recommendations for how we can really get as much potential high quality parkland as we can in the future. So that's happening at a policy level with the city right now. And then again, I'll just remind the commission and everybody that the purpose of this meeting is to receive comments, and if that is a comment of concern, by all means, provide that comment.
Thanks. Next question, the EIR relies on two analyses that were done by regarding the bike plan and the pedestrian plan that were completed 1 and 2 years ago. Did those assume a population of 140,000 people in the city of Mountain View when those were prepared? Do those need to go back and in order to be actually used as valid basis for the EIR, do they need to be revisited?
I will have to get back to that. I am not sure what, if any, population basis those are based off of.
Okay, thank you. Renee, you mentioned this incremental thing. This works on small individual bites. The city of East Palo Alto is going through an issue because the sewer district is declining to approve new permits because they're saying that the cumulative nature of all the different projects have been approved exceed the ability of the sewer district to actually handle the wastewater treatment for the city of East Palo Alto. One of the things I thought was fairly different about this EIR is that it looks at these cumulative impacts. And so what you described is on this fair value thing is a small incremental thing. How does we need a new police department, or we need a new source of water factored in to something like this when it's not? I mean, we're talking about death by 1,000 cuts. Eventually, one cut is one cut too many. And what you described, it doesn't explain how large infrastructure projects are brought forward and how they're brought in. Can you tell me how that occurs?
So for water and sewer, I think it's a different discussion for some of the police fire improvements that we may have to get back to you on. The water and sewer master plans that I've referenced, those are not just looking at the pipes that are in the ground to say, get the sewage from the project to the wastewater treatment plant, which we share with Palo Alto. Those projects are also looking at both the supply of water that we need and the demand on the wastewater treatment plant that we share with Palo Alto. And so those are the forward planning documents that we use to say whether or not we need to, yes, talk about more supply, or whether or not we need to start talking about getting more capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. Right now, we have sufficient capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. What we are finding overall in the city, especially concerning water and sewer use, is that even without the drought restrictions that are in place right now, when we rebuild to much higher standards than what's out there. We have very strict building codes. We have very strict water conservation and landscaping ordinances. So the biggest thing I want to talk about that we've realized with this round of water and sewer master plans is the assumptions that we have been making for the last 50 years on how much water a residential unit is going to use and how much sewage is produced are extremely conservative, because we are not using as much water and we are not using and therefore not producing as much sewage as we have been for years and years. And so what we're starting to see is we do have capacity and supply in those things, but how we look at those for long-term planning is those water and sewer master plans.
And then a couple of just quick questions around that. I read a little while ago that we loaned East Palo Alto some of our water. Is that a one-year thing? Can we get that back?
I will have to, we'll have to get you the details on it. I can tell you that we loaned them water because we actually have a minimum amount that we have to buy from SFPUC per our contract, and we were not meeting that minimum amount.
Okay.
I can add to that. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add, because I do actually know a little bit about that it's not a loan. It was a sale of the supply guarantee that Mountain View had. There was a sale of I think maybe 1 MGD, or I think that's how much it was. So East Palo Alto paid a substantial amount for that, and it is a permanent transfer because Mountain View does have a lot of capacity.
A permanent transfer.
Mountain View has so much capacity that it pays for more water than it actually uses because there is a minimum requirement for purchase from SFPUC.
Okay. And then the last question is the reclaimed water system that would come from a sewage treatment plant. Is that a funded CIP?
So we just updated the recycled water master plan within the last, I think it went to council in January, February of this year. So it laid out increase in use in North Bayshore and then expansion out to East Wisman. And the projects that are laid out in that document that are required for us to do that expansion do get rolled into the CIP.
Thank you. Right, that's the last of my questions. So there are 15 different sections of these review items that are reviewed. Not everybody may have comments or questions on the different ones. Are there ones that folks would like to make sure we specifically look at and make sure we capture comments of those? If there's no comments, then we'll just basically tell staff there's no comments on that item. Folks have, I know water, I've heard water several times, so that's 4.15, that section. I'll have some comments on 4.9, 4.13, and 4.14. There are hydrology, public services, recreation, transportation, and utilities. There are others. Nope. Another folks want to comment on?
I think Commissioner Gutierrez is, yeah.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I have a concern. It's a comment, but it's a concern about what's written with the park space usage. Let's see, it's PDF page number 380 under section 4.13-4. And I quote, joint use agreements between the city and NVWSD allow for a shared public access to school grounds and facilities. End of quote. My concern is if the Parks and Rec strategic plan isn't finalized yet with those shared use agreements, the joint use agreements, by the time we finalize this updated RHNA report, that we're presenting something that's not true, that's not legally true. And I'd like to point that out so that we're aware of the potential interpretation of how that could be looked at. And if we can look at it from that perspective, get any advice from Eric or from other members of the team as to how to adequately describe that in a more realistic position.
Commissioner Nunez, you had wanted to bring up discussion on item. Is it covered in?
Permitting? I'm sorry.
There he is.
Yeah, no, I guess like I trust that all my prior comments were somehow logged. Yep, totally. Yep, trust that. My last comment was not about any of those items, but more about the like CEQA like things that they're not looking at. So if this is the appropriate time, then I'll make that comment, and if not, then I'll just wait till.
Yeah, I think we were going to kind of open it up for anything that was missing or whatever after we've looked at these 15. So I will make sure I come back to you first for that. Okay, Commissioner Clark.
Okay, so I don't have comments specifically on different sections. When I look at program level EIRs like this, I mostly look at the very high level. What are the impacts that have been identified that can be mitigated? What are the impacts that can't be mitigated? Did we miss anything, and do the mitigations that are called out make sense? Is there anything else that we could do to mitigate some of those? And then especially what are the significant and unavoidable impacts, and what is the action plan around those? And so just at a very high level, I'm comfortable with the program level EIR analysis that's come out here. I think the items that can be mitigated, I think the mitigations are mostly appropriate. I think and a lot of the staff has called out and the consultants have called out in the analysis. A lot of these will be addressed in project level EIRs over time, since we're talking about such a long time frame. And obviously, the most important thing to look at is the significant and unavoidable impacts, and that's related to air quality. I think it's been called out. Like it would take a pretty significant build out for us to get to that point. But it looks like a lot of these will be able, air quality in particular, the mitigations that are identified that could be implemented at a project level will mitigate those concerns. And there also maybe doesn't necessarily take into account some of the building code and other standards that will probably be coming down the pike over the next 8 years. So overall, I'm comfortable with the EIR and the analysis. I don't think we've missed anything significant, and I think the mitigation measures that have been identified are appropriate, and I think a lot of these items will be addressed through either project level EIRs or ultimately what a lot of folks, commissioners have talked about earlier are policies that are implemented outside of the housing element process to address things like water conservation and other things. And just on water, just because I've heard this so many times over the years, everyone, and I think rightly, assumes that when you say you're going to increase housing by a significant or the population by a significant percentage, everyone just assumes that means that water usage is inevitably going to increase at that a commensurate percentage or somehow tied, or just going to increase generally. And one of the things that I learned over time is just that for example, Mountain View's population has grown significantly between the year 2000 and 2020, and our water usage has declined something like, I believe, 30% over that period of time. And that's because, and we're talking about housing tonight, housing is generally compared to other uses of land, not a significant driver of water usage compared to other uses like commercial or things that require landscaping and other things. And so, as was pointed out by staff earlier, as you redevelop to much higher standards, you actually end up using less water at a much greater density of population than you would have had you just remained at status quo. And so I just wanted to point that out. I thought those statistics were interesting. Like the primary drivers that you really need to look at are, for water usage in particular, are commercial, anything that requires landscaping, those sorts of things. And even when you redevelop commercial, you're redeveloping to a higher standard. And I think that's why our water usage has significantly declined over time. And I think we'll hopefully continue to do so with conservation and other means. But those are all policies that, and other things that that the city will develop over time to address that are sort of outside the EIR, even though it's an important piece of the analysis. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But overall, I'm comfortable with the analysis that's been done and the mitigations that have been identified. And I'll leave it at that. Might have comments later based on what others say, but that's my comments at a high level.
Commissioners? I'll chime in. So I was just, it seemed like an inconsistency to me. In 9.4, in the discussion around preserving the water table and underground wells, it highlights the fact that the wells are not used. But then in section 115, the analysis that was done by the consultant says that if we need more water, we would tap into the wells. And so it seemed like an inconsistency to me in the EAR saying, hey, we don't use the wells, but in later section it said, if we need to, we'll use the wells. So it was just something didn't seem consistent there in the way that was set up. Overall, I would agree with Commissioner Clark. A lot of these things were relatively well covered. What I noticed more than else was thinking about this at the cumulative level. Okay, you can add one more police officer. You can add one more police officer. You can add one more police officer. If you use the ratio that we have today, it would say that we're going to need to add more than 100 additional police officers in order to be able to support a population of 140,000 people. We don't have what I heard is we don't have a specific plan for the building that all these people are going to go in. The cars are incremental, the people are incremental, but there's some things that are big chunks. And it doesn't feel like to me that those are that's adequately addressed. I asked specifically about Ringstorf, Shoreline, and Cuesta. From the document, the police station, the fire station in North Bay Shore and the fire station in Wistman have additional capacity. The stations in the other locations don't appear to have additional capacity at this point. You can add more fire, you can add more trucks, but do you have a space to put the truck? Those kind of large chunks of improvement, since they're not going to happen. You can't incrementally add a brick to the fire station and on Ringstorf. You got to add a big chunk to it. So one of my observations, it felt like in a lot of these things that where those big chunks were largely glossed over in the way the EIR was written, that there could be big items like that. And the fact that the analysis says that Mountain View Los Altos High School District is already over capacity and we'll have to add more, is going to have more students, was not addressed. So I'm assuming this is being sent to Mountain View Los Altos High School District to figure out what they're going to do, if there's something needs to be there. But the grade school districts looks like, I'm sure they may have some comment back on this. But your analysis says that those two school districts are probably okay. But it said that Mountain View Los Altos High School District is short of school space. And then nothing was said about it. So I was troubled by the lack of, okay, so that seems like an unavoidable impact. Like Commissioner Gutierrez, I don't know how you add 60,000 more people and not overwhelm the parks we have. We don't know how many more parks we're going to get. And those parks that we have, we're not sure we can keep because we don't have agreements in place with the school district to make sure that we can keep them. How do you know that we're not going to have an unavoidable impact on our park space? So maybe it just needs more detail. Maybe you've done those calculations, but I can't imagine going from 80,000 people to 140,000 people with the parks that we have today and nobody noticing, okay? It doesn't fit right with me. And in general, I was also very troubled by the blanket inclusion of Shoreline as part of North Bay Shore. I believe North Bay Shore should be treated as an area of the city, just like Montaloma and downtown and Cuesta Park. And you don't just lump Shoreline Park into North Bay Shore and say, oh yeah, Shoreline's there. It's a great resource. I agree it's a resource, but don't use it to distort the amount of space per resident when you add in North Bay Shore in its entirety. There's going to be a requirement associated with that. So I came away very uncomfortable with the Parks and Recreation scope that was in here because I couldn't see how we could possibly. I didn't come away believing in this disclosure that you'd actually disclose how you're going to solve the problem. If that's worth. And then to the point of getting more water. If we're not using it as water, great. But when I looked at what's my understanding that the reclaimed water system out of Palo Alto, the water treatment plant, even if we put in what Renee's talked about, we wouldn't use all that we could get. And what better way to use less water than to use the water we already have better? Okay, so maybe it shouldn't just be looking at bringing pipes into North Bay Shore and Swissman, but let's bring them to Ringstorff Park. Let's bring them to other places around the city and take advantage of it. I mean, we haven't discovered any new rivers or mountains with glaciers on them recently. So, here's a place where there's water that we can use. It seems like that should be something in our water plan that's not adequately addressed in this. I'm not ready to give up grass. Sorry, Commissioner Nunez. I like grass. I know people that like throwing Frisbee and things like that on grass. So we will have to disagree on the elimination of grass in the city. But I did find it interesting that that on my drive from the airport today, apparently the city of Denver is offering you get $1 per square foot of landscape that you return into low water landscaping residents. So any resident that if they take 200 square feet of their lot and remove the grass and put in something else, they get $200. So I thought that was it's probably beyond the scope of the Eir, but I thought it was I could see people actually getting off their butt and doing it if they thought they could get a little bit of money back to repair. So those were my comments are mainly on where there was a large incremental step. And when the SFPUC says that they could cut our water by 59.5%, that means that we only have 40% left. Boy, we got to conserve a lot, Mr. Commissioner Clark, to only have 40% of the water we're allowed. So I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
The trick is we're not using anywhere near our allowance. So even if they cut it by half, we'd probably, I forget how far below we are a minimum purchase, but I think we'd probably still be fine.
Vice Chair, yes.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what you said, Chair Cranston. And my question earlier, using the transportation as an example, pretty much you summed up what I have as an issue with the EIRs, because they're so technical. I'm not sure how to draw the line or even ask the question as to, does this make sense? It is the cumulative, and I know we're looking at it at a high level, but it doesn't in sort of real life seem to make sense to me when you tally up all the numbers. I don't know how it ends up being a less than significant impact for several things. And I will, along with Commissioner Gutierrez and Chair Cranston, reiterate the parks issue. I know very often, even on individual projects, there seems to be a political sort of tension between housing and parks. And if we're looking at an overall environmental impact, trees do a lot. Landscaping, if we can do it sort of more climate appropriate landscaping, I think they weigh heavily on mitigating impacts of development. And so I don't want to lose sight of trying to maintain, if not increase, what sort of tree canopy we have, and the quality of the trees, not just like little tiny ones that have to live above parking garages, but a lot of our big mature ones that do really a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to carbon sequestering and whatnot. The chart on 4.13.4 discussing the parks. I know that I find that there's no issue using the regional parks and open space in there. Those are included. It's just such a high percentage. It's like 75% of our total city parks. And then the neighborhood school site parks are about 10%. So not knowing what's happening with the school joint agreement, that's 10% we don't know about. And I would say that with, Caltrain electrifying, we're really kind of creating a barrier. Shoreline is already at the very northernmost portion of Mountain View. And I would say it's hard to access for a lot of people. It's not an easy place to go to for sort of like, park and recreation. So once we electrify Caltrain, that's another barrier that we're placing towards getting towards Shoreline for a lot of the community. And so I personally have a hard time, I know we're looking at high level again, to say that 75% of our city-owned parks are equally distributed, and that's not the case. So when we look at it, the numbers don't convey the reality of it. So I just want to make note about our park system and the significant impacts in reality of a lot of development and potentially losing a lot of green space and open space. That's all.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, sir. So I have one more point that I forgot. A friend of mine told me, "Hey, wake up!" I'm like, "No, I have my notes." So I'm looking at my notebook, and then looking at my notes. My concern is on page 380, and I quote: "School sites make up 79% of cities' neighborhood parks." And then when I look at page 54 under 3.4.6. And I quote, "At least one public gathering / open space / plaza shall be provided with a minimum area to be determined based on site size." And I bring this up as a concern because the bullet point above that says amend the commercial zones CN and CS to allow residential uses with the following stipulations. So it sounds like this is still a proposal that's not yet set in stone. And I'm wondering if, and here's my concern, is it possible to add on language to this point of at least one public gathering open site with a sentence that ends at based on site size? If we could add on with the goal of meeting each neighborhood park space requirement or something to that effect. Because if we don't take advantage of this part of the RHNA, then how would we be able to at least have that be noted accurately that would best represent then the needs of the community and the expectations of the city and its potential relationships with the developers when it comes down to these issues of open space allocations or trade-offs of them? Thanks.
Commissioners Haymeyer and Dempsey, no comments on individual sections? Commissioner Haymeyer?
Yeah, I think my comments, I agree with what Commissioner Clark said, and clearly I struggled a little bit to understand how we really utilize a program EIR. I do think that on the general horizon, we need to be prepared if HCD is a lot stricter with what we have, and it sounds like there are contingency plans, but reading the YIMBY letter certainly raised things that I thought we had discussed, and I just hope that folks on the commission had a chance to read it and can take those to heart as public comment is being considered.
And if no specific comments on Commissioner Dempsey, then we'll open up to broader concerns about the EIR. Commissioner Nunez?
Awesome. Yeah, so one of the things that I'm like seeing, or just in terms of from a public person, like a member of the public perspective, not even like a commissioner or advocate, what have you, just a regular person who cares about what's going on. I don't really see much around the discussion about what would happen if we didn't do the project. Like, hey, the project is going to release some greenhouse gases if it gets built. What would happen if it didn't get built? What would happen if, instead of like trying to figure out, how we can use water more effectively, if we just said, well, we are getting less allocation this year from wherever we get it, so we're not going to build. Like, what would be the opposite end of not doing any of these actions? I would really love to know. I don't know what the formula would be. Maybe it is somewhere in here and I'm missing it. But it would be really fantastic for like not just here for our purposes on the commission, but for everybody to be quite clear on what would happen if we did not do this, and is that the better alternative for our, like children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren? Is that really what we want to be doing here? So that's my comment.
Other concerns, things that the Eir has missed? Nope. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, so Ellen and Eric and Jill got copious notes. And we look forward to seeing all this in a response. With that, we will close section 5 and move on to commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. Just to note that no actions will be taken on any of these items during this time. So, Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wanted to let everyone know that I attended the R3 zoning discussion last night within the Rainstorf community. And we had a nice turnout of about 35 people, but a little disappointed because there weren't too many renters that showed up. And, it'd be nice to be able to get feedback from the community that actually lives in the area, right, as renters, outside of the few that did attend as homeowners or business owners. That's about it. Thanks.
Well, I've attended all three of the first three, and yeah, this was I'm in the mix in the San Antonio de Medio area. I was surprised we didn't have a higher percentage of renters in the attendee list, but in the others it was about 65-70% were homeowners, and the other 25 to 30% were renters, which is certainly consistent with Montaloma. I don't know what the mix is over in East Wisman, Moffett area. So they've been very interesting. We had a chance to listen. I've been on groups that are totally opposed to any new density, and other groups that are like, build everything we can, and so it's actually been very enlightening to hear the range of feedback, and that people are really contributing. They're talking. They're not being bashful, which is so Eric, I appreciate the fact you're doing this outreach, and hopefully we'll continue to get that good feedback on the next 3, or 4, I guess.
That's right. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's 3 more, and then as Commissioner Gutierrez said, we're doing polls at each meeting to find out kind of who we're getting and who we're missing, and we will have continued outreach efforts through the remainder of the year to try to get more input from some of those underrepresented groups. So this is really just the first step in the process. Well, not the first step. We've been at it for 2 years, but it's just part of the process. Yeah, and other than that, I think I mentioned at the last meeting that at our next meeting, we have a few items. We have a apartment project on El Camino by Sunnyvale. We have an update to the work plan, and we have another AB 361 authorization to conduct virtual meetings. And then the next meeting after that is tentatively scheduled the Middlefield Park Master Plan. So those are the upcoming items.
Any other announcements? Okay. Then we will move to adjourn at, I think my time zones here, 8:55 p.m. Pacific time, right? Until our next regularly scheduled meeting on August 17th, 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.